Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story and welcome to Friday. Well, we're just one weekend away from the start of Oregon's short legislative session. It promises to have all sorts of fascinating things, including turning back the clock on our experiment with decriminalizing drugs and creating more flexibility in the unique urban growth boundaries that encircle each of our Oregon cities. So, a legislative preview. That's our big story tonight. Mark Twain is quoted as saying, "No man's life, liberty, or property are safe while the legislature is in session." That may be a little bit offensive to some of those right now who are preparing for the legislature, but I suspect a lot of people are going to feel that Twain is, not wrong. The 2024 legislative session in Oregon will be short, just 35 days. That happens every 2 years here. It's a time for moving money around in the two-year budget cycle that's already underway, and a time to take on big fix or two in some of the laws that kind of need a little changing. And that's why Measure 110, Oregon's first in the nation law to decriminalize drugs, is one of the biggest issues lawmakers are going to tackle. Earlier this week, leaders from both parties talked about Measure 110 and the changes that need to be made. There are some details left to be ironed out, but it does seem clear that drugs will be recriminalized at some level. Here are both the House and leaders from both parties.
When it comes to our addiction crisis that is impacting every community, rural Oregonians as well as people in Portland that we all know, we are really working on making sure that we have a comprehensive plan that can address this issue urgently, and that includes things like making sure that people have the right supports at the right times so that they can move through their own path to recovery. Additionally, we need to make sure that law enforcement has the tools they need to be able to confiscate hard drugs like meth and fentanyl.
110, I think, is the biggest crisis that we're facing right now. We have more people dying on the street. We have people at open air drug markets. We need to get to a solution. We've talked about the task force that's there. We're not there. We have a starting point. We had a bill that we presented. They have their framework. Somewhere in the middle, we'll get there, but we have to have accountability through the criminal justice system, but we also have to have that compassionate care. And I believe those are the two things that are going to drive the conversation for Measure 110. Early and often intervention, I think, is the key to the success of Measure 110 and what that looks like.
I think from my perspective, we haven't started the session yet. So we haven't started the process of getting public testimony, public input on the package. We've heard, the committee has worked for many months and has heard from experts and other people in the field of addiction and law enforcement and other perspectives. But the public input is really important to this process too. I'm sure we're all getting emails or phone calls from our constituents about the proposal, and I'm really interested to engage in those conversations. I had a email just that we drafted a response to this week from a constituent who's a Democrat who says this proposal isn't tough enough. And I said, okay, let's engage on that. What would you like to see? Why do you want it to be a Class A misdemeanor on par with things like strangulation and stalking? What level of misdemeanor would you like to see and why? So I think that, for me, that's the piece that hasn't yet happened. It's starting to happen now that we've rolled out the package and the public has started to contact us individually as legislators, but that conversation also needs to happen in public.
So the takeaway there, it seems clear drugs will be recriminalized at some level. The Democrats want it to be a Class C misdemeanor, which is the lowest of the misdemeanors. Republicans generally want it to be Class A, which is the highest, just below a felony. Both sides want the charge to motivate drug users to get help. It also seems clear that a statewide law will be passed making it illegal to use drugs in public. Right now, you can drink a beer on the sidewalk, but you cannot do that actually, but you can smoke fentanyl under the current law. So that needs to change, a lot of folks think. The other big issue is housing and land use. Governor Kotek wants $500 million for a variety of projects under the big title. One of the controversial plans would allow cities in some circumstances to move the urban growth boundary to allow for more homes to be built on that land. Let's jump over now to the Senate side and see what the leaders of the two parties say about that.
So as it relates to housing, we think one of the most important elements of a significant package is infrastructure dollars and also bringing in new land to UGB. You have to do something different if you're going to make change. And the governor set out aggressive goal of 36,000 housing units a year. State-wide, we're currently doing about 18 to 20,000. So it's almost doubling of what the production is currently for housing. In order to do that, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result or a better result. And so land is part of that. Maybe you all know in my private life, I spent the last 20 years working for builders of all types of housing, apartments, single family, commercial, and also have done affordable housing. And the one thing that is painful to know from that experience is it takes from start to ready to build, it's about a 3 to 5 year process, and that's if things go well. And so you have to speed up that timeline if you're going to make an impact on housing production. Because if we don't, if we keep doing the same thing we've been doing and we don't do the things that are necessary, we're not going to reach that goal until after Governor Kotek's first term. I would like to start reaching that goal by, at least getting on pace to reach that goal by next year.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to Governor Kotek. I mean, she has been laser focused, and I've said this before, she really does have her finger on the pulse of what Oregonians are caring about. I think Senator Knopp just said, even just from polling and things that we've seen, housing is what we hear from our constituents, and it's really where we need to be putting our attention. She did really good work, is my understanding, during the interim, trying to bring different stakeholders together, and her bill is going to receive a public hearing in front of the Senate Housing Committee next week. Not just around the conversation around land use and the land use exemptions. There is a lot to like in terms of the Housing Production Office, looking at streamlined permitting, looking at the investments that are going to be bipartisan around shovel-ready land. A lot of that conversation has been happening. Looking at some innovative tools and strategies. I think Senator Anderson had legislation around a revolving loan fund to be able to leverage additional investment to help affordable housing get started in communities.
So a lot going on there, and I know that was a lot of information we just gave you, but those two topics, building more houses, in part by moving some urban growth boundaries, and then recriminalizing Measure 110, are going to touch just about every Oregonian one way or another, and a lot of those you who don't live in Oregon. That's why we're going to be following those as they make their way through the legislature. In the meantime, what are your thoughts on the legislative session? Let us know about the session in general, or Measure 110, or the urban growth boundary, really whatever's on your mind. Send it our way, will you? You could email us, the address on your screen there. It's thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you, and you never know, we might use your comment on the air. And while we're talking about priorities for the upcoming session, here's a priority for you. Tune in to The Story on Monday night. We're taking the show on the road and dedicating our entire half hour to the start of Oregon's short legislative session. From extended one-on-one interviews to a tour showing you how you can get involved, and even a bit of history mixed in. Ever wonder, for example, who that gold guy statue is meant to represent? We know, and we'll tell you. We'll explain that and a whole lot more Monday night on The Story at 6:30. This year's session will be the last for several lawmakers who walked out of last year's session for 6 weeks. Last night we told you about how the Oregon Supreme Court announced that the 9 Republicans and 1 independent who walked off the job would be barred from running for re-election under Oregon's Measure 113. The voter-approved measure says if you rack up 10 or more unexcused absences, you're out. The court said that was clear. That was the intent of the voters. Well, we talked with Oregon Republican leader Tim Knopp, who you just heard from. He led that walkout. He said the law's language did not match up.
I understand the ballot measure, but the ballot measure says you can't, you can't run in the election that is after your current term has expired. And this election is before our current term expires. So we didn't think that in the English language it would apply, but the court has made a different determination.
Oh, yes, they did. Knopp did go on to say that he thought the walkout was worth it. We asked what you thought, and a vast majority of you agreed with the court ruling. Matt wrote in to say, I commend the Oregon Supreme Court's resolve to clap back at the state legislators who were trying to avoid being held accountable for their truant behavior despite full well knowing the intent of the state's voters that we expect them to report to work and move legislation. Yes, words matter, but so does intent. Actions have consequences. And Marie wrote in to say, I'm doing a little dance over the Supreme Court's ruling. Hard to believe Republicans thought they could just defy the will of the people. And Rob left us this voicemail.
They're elected by the people. They're paid to do a job. They need to work in the private sector. If you don't show up for work after your sick days and personal days are used up, you don't have a job anymore. So I feel that they were given too much leeway.
All right, thanks for that. And another Rob wrote in to say they walked out because majority Democrats were going to pass bills they didn't like. Too bad. That's how democracy works. But a few of you did side with the Republicans, like Jim, who wrote, the Democratic Party of Oregon is getting exactly what they accused MAGA voters of, the end of democracy. And Pat said, not me, another Pat, that was the only way their voices could be heard. The verbiage of the measure needs to be clarified when talking about terms served, and the voters really need to research the measures they're voting for. We want to hear your thoughts on this and really on anything we talk about. You can send an email to us. We read everything you send us. We listen to all the voicemails. We really do. Here's the address again, thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. And speaking of last night, I have a correction that I want to make involving the story we did last night on the Port of Morrow spreading nitrates on farm fields. The port has nitrates in its wastewater that comes from commercial food production companies on its properties. The aquifer in Morrow County, where the port is located, is contaminated with nitrates that seep down through the soil. The port and farmers and feedlots all contribute to the problem. That's a huge deal because thousands of mostly low-income folks use backyard wells to get their water from that aquifer. Well, the port has a permit for spreading its water, but it's violated that permit numerous times over the years. And last night I told you it had happened again because it's forbidden from spreading that water during the winter when there are few plants to absorb the water. That was not correct. The port is allowed to spread the water in the winter until the winter of 25-26, then it can't anymore. But still, it is correct to say the permit was violated because it's once again spread more of that wastewater than is allowed. So yes, it can spread wastewater in the winter, but no, not as much as it did in November and December. I apologize for the error. When we come back, a terrifying situation for everyone involved. In Beaverton City Park this week, a man caught himself on fire and later died. People there say it's a sign of a much bigger problem.
And there's no resources. Like, I tried to get into treatment when I came up here, and I'm still waiting.
And I think it's reasonable as a parent to raise the flag of, what are we doing here?
What Beaverton's mayor says is being done about the addiction and homeless problems out in the suburbs when this story returns. Well, this is a big year for the city of Portland. Our government is undergoing some really dramatic changes. The new form of government is officially switching over on January 1st of 2025, but a lot of things need to be in place before that happens, and we're going to be seeing a lot of work done this year. The architect of that work is Michael Jordan. No, not the NBA legend. He probably does get that joke a lot, so stop it. But maybe a legend in his own right within the city of Portland's Hall. He's the city's chief administrative officer and the man in charge of the transition to the new form of government. It's a huge undertaking, and he's talking about it this week with Laurel Porter on Straight Talk.
We are the biggest city in the United States with a commission form of government. All other big cities have moved to a different form. Strong mayor, council manager, but a different form, usually meaning that there was one person accountable for the executive branch. And that's what we're moving to. People, it's a big change and people get nervous and it's anxiety-ridden kind of shift. But what I tell people is we're actually moving from being the outlier to being in the norm of how city governments operate in the United States.
But the change is going to be expensive, a lot more expensive than voters anticipated. Right now, estimates show it's going to cost something like $25 million a year to run the new government. In addition to the one-time transition costs, that's roughly $15 million more than it takes this year. And if you've checked on Portland's budget lately, it's not in a great spot.
To the point of layoffs, I've said it from the very beginning, and it still remains true today. The transition of city government is not about a force reduction exercise. And in fact, in my travels to most of the bureaus and services that we give, when I talk to people, they're overwhelmed. They don't have enough capacity to do what they're asked to do today. And so this isn't about force reduction. Having said that, you may know, and your viewers may know, that the city's facing a pretty tough budget year. And in fact, the Bureau of Development Services has already laid off 56 folks. And I would imagine the Bureau of Transportation is facing potential layoffs this year also. So it doesn't mean there won't be layoffs, but they're not associated with transition.
You can watch the rest of the conversation coming up next on Straight Talk. Jordan goes over why he thinks the new form of government will be more efficient and his advice for the new mayor and city administrator. That's right here at KGW at 7 o'clock, or catch it anytime on the KGW YouTube channel. Homelessness and the addiction crisis, of course, not confined just to the Portland area. We know surrounding suburbs, cities, including Beaverton, are also grappling with this growing problem. It really came to a head in a big and disturbing way at a Beaverton city park this week when a 29-year-old man caught himself on fire in the park. He lit a cigarette, which ignited a flammable liquid that was on his clothing, and in a really horrific scene, caught on fire. People in the park were able to get the flames out, but he was rushed to the hospital on that Life Flight helicopter, where he died. This is an area where a lot of people hang out, and it's where the main library branch for Beaverton is. A lot of families there use the park as well. It's also right across the street from a school, a Catholic school, and we got several emails from concerned parents at the school. Lisa wrote in to say, the area has taken a dramatic turn for the worse. What should have been used as a COVID resource center and severe weather shelter is turned into a 24-hour low barrier shelter, less than 20 feet property to property from an elementary school. How and why the city of Beaverton justifies this location is just beyond me. Blair Best went to find out.
As Portland fights to keep up with the crisis on its streets,
It seems like
homeless people like Ronald turn to surrounding cities, including Beaverton.
because Portland and Multnomah County didn't have no shelters for me and my girlfriend.
James has a similar story.
And there's no resources. Like, I tried to get into treatment when I came up here, and I'm still waiting.
There's spread from Portland. If Portland doesn't have the services, these people are going to come into all of the other bedroom communities.
Sarah Toner lives in Beaverton. She sees this daily.
My child goes to a school that's right across the street from a shelter.
Earlier this week, a man accidentally caught himself on fire in City Park. He was life-flighted to a hospital where he later died. It happened right across the street from that shelter outside the public library.
And I think it's reasonable as a parent to raise the flag of, what are we doing here?
In a statement, Beaverton Mayor Lacey Beatty listed steps the city is taking to enhance public safety. Those include expanding their police bike team and offering mental health support to those in need. She also notes an addiction resource center is in the works at the county level.
I have a feeling the city's looking at us as if we are just this uptight, clenched population that don't want this around our kids. And it's not that we don't want this around our kids, we just want the support necessary for these individuals.
That was Blair Best reporting. Beaverton's mayor is also calling for understanding and compassion during these challenging times as they work to keep the city a safe and vibrant place. Let's turn to something lighter. When we come back, it's Groundhog Day. But keepers at the Oregon Zoo trust the mighty beaver a lot more. It wasn't always that way. We're heading into the KGW vault to see how the weather was predicted in Oregon way back in the 70s. Well, it's Groundhog Day again. But if winter has you down, take heart. Both Punxsutawney Phil out of Pennsylvania and Stumptown Phil here in Oregon, they both predict an early spring. Apparently, neither saw their shadows. Stumptown Phil, short for Filbert, started his fur casting in 2020. The zookeepers say they'd rather trust a beaver since groundhogs are not native to the Northwest. They say since then, he's been right about, half the time. Not so bad. But the zoo has long had rodent prognosticators, including groundhogs. Let's go to the KGW vault now and check out the forecast from Groundhog Day 1979.
Warren Isla have had the honors of introducing to the Portland news media the zoo's new groundhog, Chuck. And perfect timing it was. This was Chuck's day, and he performed admirably. The sun was out, and yes, he did see his shadow, along with those of the cameramen and reporters who recorded Chuck's every move. According to tradition now, winter will be a long one, and you can forget about spring for a while. Many public figures would have liked the publicity this groundhog was getting today, but then again, they don't have their very own day, nor would they probably crawl around in the snow like Chuck. After about 5 minutes, Chuck was swooped up and taken to his zoo home in the Children's Mouse House. Undoubtedly, he'll be brought out here again at the same time next year if he gets through the next 6 weeks of his predicted cold weather. From the Washington Park Zoo on Groundhog Day, Pete Schulberg, News Center 8.
Pete Schulberg, he's still in the area. How you doing, Pete? It looked like it was kind of a frigid Groundhog Day back in '79. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. Remember the story, our collective story, that never ends. It just goes on, and you're a big part of that. Have a great weekend. I'll see you right back here Monday night from Salem as the legislature starts its 35-day session. We're going to leave you now with a look out the window over Pioneer Courthouse Square in downtown Portland. Tonight is the kickoff of the Portland Winter Light Festival. It's running through the next few weeks. Pretty cool. They see all those flashes of fire down there. They have impressive sculptures and light and, yep, fire. It's happening all over the city, and it's free. Check it out.